the current DOJ under Pam Bondi is covering up.
Would you declassify the Epstein files?
Yeah, I would.
The list of clients that went to the island has not been made public.
Yeah, it's very interesting, isn't it? But yeah, I'd be inclined to do the Epstein. I'd have no problem with it.
Make some noise if you care about the Jeffrey Epstein scandal.
Raise your hand if it matters a lot to you. Raise your hand. So every hand of 7,000 people.
The missing video footage from Jeffrey Epstein's death, obviously, is the most baffling piece of the puzzle, from the way it was released to the strange. The so-called raw tape wasn't raw at all, and now, many point fingers at the DOJ or even the FBI as the ones who may have buried the truth. If that's the case, what exactly were they hiding? Who authorized enough to did it? And what if Pam Bondi wasn't lying, and that Trump himself was being played? Back to the early half of 2025, the release of the Jeffrey Epstein prison footage has raised significant suspicions regarding its origin and authenticity. Metadata analysis revealed that the so-called raw footage was not the original version, as it had been opened and processed in Adobe Premiere Pro. It appeared to be assembled from at least 2 different source clips, saved multiple times, exported, and then uploaded to the DOJ's website. It was confirmed through metadata examination that this raw video had undergone modifications, contradicting claims of it being unaltered. Further scrutiny of the XF data showed 4 file paths, with 2 being identical and 2 unique, suggesting the clips were stitched together in a way that compromised its purported raw state. Technical aspects of the footage further fueled doubts about its quality and editing. Authorities claimed that 2 versions of the footage were released: a raw version, intended to represent the original capture, and an enhanced version, which underwent mild sharpening and contrast adjustments to improve visibility. However, abrupt changes in the ASCII occurred around 11:58 p.m., marking a sudden shift that was not synchronized between the raw and enhanced versions. This inconsistency extended to the point where the aspect ratio diverged differently in each version during the transition to the new day, indicating manual intervention rather than a simple file merge or codec switch. The editing was described as sloppy, with visible shifts in the footage that undermined the professionalism expected, especially given prior assurances that it would be handled meticulously to build public trust. Concerns about the footage's evidentiary integrity were prominent, as the modifications effectively broke the chain of evidence. A digital forensics expert from UC Berkeley, who has testified in numerous court cases, stated that such a file would not be admissible in court and recommended returning to the source for a direct export from the original system without any alterations. This advice appeared to be ignored, as no confirmation was provided that a true direct export from the prison camera system still exists, and system logs were not released to verify the footage's authenticity as an unaltered copy. Issues with the footage's duration and camera angles added layers of skepticism. The primary camera, facing Epstein's cell door, was not recording due to a DVR malfunction since July 29, 2019, and only provided streaming without storage, while the released footage came from a common area camera lacking a direct view into his cell. A missing minute around 11:59 to 12:00 aligned suspiciously with inmate testimonies, suggesting someone approached the L-tier area around midnight. The camera angle was partially obstructed by walls, creating potential blind spots where individuals could pass without being captured on video. Discrepancies between promises and reality intensified suspicions. Figures like Dan Bongino and Kash Patel had publicly stated they would release the original footage to eliminate any doubts of manipulation, yet the version provided was edited. FBI directors, DOJ officials, and others denied camera malfunctions, despite the Inspector General's report confirming the cell door camera was not recording. Additionally, Mystery Man, Shadow in orange, was captured ascending the stairs with a guard at 10:40 p.m., conflicting with accounts that all inmates were locked down by 8:00 p.m. The 2023 IG report attributed this to a guard carrying inmate clothing, but a recent FBI memo claimed it was Epstein being returned to his cell post-lockdown, highlighting inconsistencies. The gap between assurances of a deliberate, non-rushed process and the actual output was stark. Officials emphasized they would avoid haste to ensure the public received reliable, unaltered footage, but the released version featured careless edits that contradicted this. The manner of stitching files was executed in what was termed the worst possible way, potentially diminishing its legal value through visible image shifts and quality variances that could render it unusable as official evidence. Moreover, a lack of synchronization among official sources, DOJ, FBI, IG reports, and media statements offered differing details on camera status, recording times, and footage scope, inherently amplifying doubts about the disclosure process's overall integrity. In the circle of the suspects of this cover-up, the DOJ and the FBI stand out as the most suspected entities in potentially concealing the prison footage related to Jeffrey Epstein's death, given the unusual indicators surrounding its handling and release. The DOJ, as the federal agency responsible for enforcing laws and overseeing the U.S. criminal justice system, including the Federal Bureau of Prisons or BOP, holds authority to investigate, store, and disclose materials like prison footage tied to cases such as Epstein's. Reports from government sources indicate that the DOJ, alongside the FBI and the Office of the Inspector General, possesses a copy of the footage without the missing minute from around 11:59 p.m. to midnight. Yet this version has not been made public, clashing with assertions that the released one is raw. Additionally, the DOJ faces accusations of withholding substantial information, including data from Epstein's computers and financial records, as claimed by victim representative attorney Sigrid McCauley, and it has stated there is no Epstein client list, while finding no evidence to pursue third-party investigations, which some view as shielding powerful figures. The FBI, serving as the primary federal investigative agency tasked with probing federal crimes like human trafficking and Epstein-related activities, has the power to seize, analyze, and retain evidence such as prison footage. It may have coordinated with the DOJ in this matter, as both agencies have declared the footage supports a suicide conclusion, though video forensics experts point out the angles fail to clearly show access to Epstein's cell, undermining their claims. The FBI is also accused of retaining information from Epstein's computers and other records, per McCauley, suggesting possible hidden evidence about accomplices or associates. As a component of the DOJ, the BOP manages federal prisons, including the Metropolitan Correctional Center, where Epstein was held, and controls surveillance systems and internal records. The BOP reportedly informed Attorney General Pam Bondi that the prison video system resets nightly, causing a 1-minute gap in footage. But this explanation is absent from the Inspector General's report and deemed unusual by video forensics experts. The 2023 Inspector General report notes a digital recording system malfunction at the MCC starting July 29, 2019, resulting in only one common area camera functioning. But the BOP has not provided system logs to verify the footage's originality. The concealment of authentic prison footage surrounding Jeffrey Epstein's reported death has sparked speculations that it might point to an orchestrated escape rather than a genuine demise, potentially allowing him to evade scrutiny while safeguarding sensitive secrets. This notion ties into broader concerns about the motives behind withholding or altering the footage, primarily to prevent the activation of a so-called deadman's trigger, a mechanism Epstein allegedly set up to automatically release incriminating information upon his death. Such a trigger could expose a vast network of powerful individuals implicated in his activities, including high-profile figures like Bill Clinton and his wife Hillary Clinton, Prince Andrew, Bill Gates, and numerous other politicians whose names have repeatedly surfaced in connection to Epstein's purported client list. By staging or facilitating Epstein's removal from custody under the guise of suicide, those orchestrating the cover-up could neutralize the deadman's trigger, ensuring that damaging evidence, such as tapes or documents detailing exploitation and blackmail, remains buried. This would drastically reduce risks for the elite figures behind the scenes, who might otherwise face public exposure, legal repercussions, and reputational ruin if the trigger were activated. Central to these suspicions is the idea that Epstein's deadman's trigger was designed as a fail-safe, programmed to disseminate compromising materials, ranging from video recordings of illicit encounters to financial records linking influential people to his operations. If he met an untimely end, reports and testimonies suggest Epstein hinted at possessing such a safeguard during his lifetime, boasting to associates that his knowledge of scandals involving the Clintons, Prince Andrew, Gates, and other politicians made him untouchable. For instance, Epstein's brother Mark quoted him in 2016, saying that if he revealed what he knew about political candidates, it could derail elections, implying a cache of information that could be unleashed posthumously. The absence of any such mass release following his announced death furies that the trigger was never tripped because Epstein was extracted alive, allowing those in power to maintain control over the narrative and prevent a cascade of revelations. This deadman's trigger would have posed an existential threat to figures like Bill Gates, who met Epstein multiple times post-conviction despite public denials of close ties, or the Clintons, frequently mentioned in flight logs to Epstein's Island, where alleged abuses occurred. By keeping Epstein under wraps, perhaps in protective custody or relocation, his handlers could avert the trigger's activation, shielding these individuals from accountability and preserving their influence in political and financial spheres. Further evidence points to the footage's manipulation as a deliberate effort to obscure the truth, thereby avoiding the deadman's trigger's consequences. Metadata from the released raw footage shows it was edited in Adobe Premiere Pro, stitched from multiple clips, and altered in ways that broke the chain of evidence, as confirmed by digital forensics experts who deemed it inadmissible in court. This tampering, including abrupt aspect ratio shifts and a missing minute aligning with inmate reports of midnight activity near Epstein's cell, suggests an intent to hide anomalies that might indicate staging or extraction rather than suicide. Such concealment would benefit those behind Epstein by ensuring the deadman's trigger stays dormant, without verifiable proof of death. The mechanism designed to expose the likes of Prince Andrew, who settled a multi-million-dollar lawsuit over allegations tied to Epstein, or Gates, linked to post-conviction meetings for purported philanthropic advice, remains inactive. Inmates' testimonies in the Inspector General's report, claiming checks occurred around midnight contrary to official timelines, add to the inconsistencies, implying the footage was doctored to erase signs of interference that could have facilitated Epstein's removal. The broader purpose of hiding the footage extends to mitigating risks for Epstein's enablers, who could face downfall if his client list, rumored to include the Clintons, involved in Island visits amid accusations of a cesspool of activity, and politicians entangled in settlements or coded emails like those with Jess Staley referencing fairy tale figures as potential euphemisms for victims, were revealed via the deadman's trigger. Epstein's associations, such as financing Jean-Luc Brunel's modeling agency, where abuses allegedly happened, underscore a network that a triggered release could dismantle. By potentially faking his death and concealing authentic footage, those in control could relocate Epstein, preventing him from testifying or activating the switch under duress. This strategy would protect powerful patrons from exposure, as seen in the government's pivot to a lone trafficker theory, despite escalating victim counts from dozens to over 1,000, minimizing scrutiny on accomplices. The deadman's trigger's non-activation, combined with unmonitored calls Epstein made hours before his death and conflicting official narratives about camera malfunctions, suggests a calculated effort to silence threats. Ultimately, this cover-up could preserve the status quo for elites, accused of island experiments in parody accounts, but tied to real meetings, or the Clintons and Prince Andrew, whose settlements and logs hint at deeper involvement, ensuring their secrets die with the narrative of Epstein's suicide, rather than exploding through a posthumous data dump. In the realm of intelligence and covert operations, staging events and concealing evidence are not rare anomalies. They are calculated tools used to achieve objectives that cannot be met in the open. Former CIA officer Jason Hansen has made it clear that he does not believe Jeffrey Epstein's death was a suicide. To Hansen, the circumstances were far too convenient for certain powerful parties, and the timing, coupled with a series of glaring red flags, fit the profile of a deliberate setup rather than a natural occurrence. His assessment is rooted in years of experience recognizing the fingerprints of planned operations, where the narrative presented to the public is often a carefully crafted cover for something far more strategic. To illustrate his point, Hansen recounts a scenario from the intelligence world. Imagine an intelligence agency uncovering a credible plan to bomb a church. A straightforward response might be to warn the public and evacuate the area. But in doing so, the agency would risk exposing the source of its information, a source that could continue to be invaluable for preventing future attacks. Rather than jeopardize that long-term asset, the agency devises an alternative plan. They engineer a false emergency, a water leak, that forces the church to close temporarily. When the would-be attackers arrive to carry out their plan, there are no civilians inside. The bomb detonates, but only the perpetrators are present, allowing the agency to apprehend them and dismantle the larger network they belong to. The brilliance and the controversy of such an operation lies in its subtlety. To an outside observer, the water leak might seem like a coincidence. The absence of casualties might seem like sheer luck. Yet behind the scenes, every step was deliberate. The public never sees the full picture, and the official explanation often omits the operational calculus that drove the decision. The goal, from the agency's perspective, is not to satisfy public curiosity, but to protect sources, secure broader objectives, and maintain plausible deniability. Hansen draws a direct parallel between this hypothetical scenario and Epstein's so-called suicide. In his view, the official account, that Epstein simply took his own life while under federal custody, is the equivalent of the water leak in the church bombing story, an outwardly explainable event masking an intentional action. Just as the water leak was a manufactured circumstance to control the outcome of the bombing, Epstein's death could have been staged to control the outcome of a highly volatile situation. The stakes in Epstein's case were enormous, not merely the prosecution of one man, but the potential exposure of an entire network of powerful figures implicated in his crimes. The convenience of Epstein's death for certain parties cannot be overstated. With him gone, there would be no trial, no testimony, no cross-examination that could unravel decades of illicit connections. Hansen's analogy suggests that if a small fabrication could avert massive political or personal fallout for those in positions of power, the incentive to stage such an event would be overwhelming. The death of Epstein becomes not just an end to one man's life, but a firewall erected to protect others. In the intelligence mindset, such measures are pragmatic, even if they are morally fraught. Eliminating a central figure can neutralize immediate threats and buy time for those implicated to dismantle evidence, discredit witnesses, or tighten security around their own vulnerabilities. Much like the decision to allow the church bombing to occur under controlled circumstances, the staging of Epstein's death, if indeed it was staged, would have been calculated to minimize certain risks while accepting others. The public might react with outrage or suspicion, but without irrefutable evidence, the story remains officially closed. Hansen's point is not to sensationalize, but to highlight how easily narratives can be shaped when the actors involved operate in shadows and control the flow of information. In both his hypothetical and the Epstein case, the truth is shielded not only by secrecy, but by the plausibility of the cover story. For those outside the loop, the event appears tragic yet explainable. For those inside, it is simply the successful execution of an operation whose real purpose will never be publicly acknowledged. Based on Hansen's theory, the eruption of this scandal is clearly aimed squarely at President Donald Trump. In the early months of Donald Trump's second term, beginning in January 2025, a series of deeply divisive policy moves set the stage for one of the most politically volatile stretches of his presidency. Controversial measures such as sweeping budget reforms, that favored the wealthy while cutting welfare programs, aggressive immigration enforcement under Operation Secure Borders, and a new tax overhaul that reduced rates for corporations and high earners while slashing funding for public health and education, stirred public anger and fractured even segments of his own base. Other initiatives, like the directive to alter historical information about slavery in national parks, inflamed accusations of rewriting history and erasing uncomfortable truths. It was into this politically charged atmosphere that the Epstein scandal abruptly re-emerged, drawing an immediate connection in the public mind between Trump's already embattled policies and a resurging, high-profile controversy. The timing was striking. In February 2025, the Department of Justice, led by Attorney General Pam Bondi, released heavily redacted Epstein files, frustrating expectations of transparency. By July, the administration announced there would be no further disclosures, dismissing public calls for a client list as a baseless distraction. This stance ignited anger, not only from Trump's critics, but from prominent figures within the MAGA movement, who had once championed closure of Epstein's network. The situation escalated further in August, when reports surfaced that Trump's name appeared in certain Epstein-related documents, though without any formal allegations of wrongdoing. The revelation intensified scrutiny, fueled speculation about the nature of their past connection, and positioned the scandal as a dominant media narrative, overshadowing legislative pushes such as the Gennaeus Act. The political fallout was immediate and damaging. Polling in August indicated only 16% of Americans approved of Trump's handling of the Epstein matter, while 60% disapproved. A striking blow for a president who had campaigned on promises of draining the swamp and restoring accountability. Allies like House Speaker Mike Johnson attempted to defuse the situation by stressing the administration's cooperation, but the Justice Department's refusal to release more information deepened internal fractures within the Republican ranks. Even high-profile loyalists began voicing frustration, with some considering breaking ranks altogether. For more details, in his first term, Trump's long-documented acquaintance with Epstein, spanning back to the late 1980s and marked by photographs, social events, and records of shared flights, was already a matter of public record. Although Trump has offered various explanations for distancing himself from Epstein years before his arrest, the fact remains that Epstein's high-profile death occurred squarely within Trump's first term. Officially ruled a case that Epstein killed himself, the event ignited a storm of conspiracy theories, some of which Trump himself amplified at the time, framing the incident as suspicious and politically charged. These theories kept his name in proximity to the scandal, regardless of whether he was implicated in any wrongdoing. By the second term in 2025, the Epstein narrative resurfaced with a force that many found more than coincidental. Reports of a 2003 birthday letter allegedly from Trump to Epstein, paired with suggestive imagery, added fuel to the fire. Trump categorically denied the letter's authenticity and initiated legal action over its publication. Yet the damage to his public image was compounded by the timing of the revelation. This recurrence of the Epstein scandal during both of Trump's presidencies gave rise to the perception of a targeted pattern. In his first term, the event was a shock. In his second, it felt like a sequel, reignited at a moment when his administration was already under pressure. The implications were not limited to public perception. Within his own political base, skepticism began to brew. Influential voices who had once championed him questioned the lack of full disclosure, and the narrative became a wedge that fractured even the staunchest segments of support. The coincidence of these two waves, Epstein's death and the later document controversies, cemented the sense that the scandal was an unavoidable shadow over Trump's tenure. Trump's personal connection to Epstein, though dated, was never far from the surface of these discussions. Accounts of social overlap, business competition, and even disputes over property and personnel became recurring reference points whenever the scandal reemerged. In some tellings, these details were used to frame Trump as having once been within Epstein's orbit. In others, they were cited to underscore the eventual break between the two men. Either way, the linkage was durable, and each new development in the Epstein saga acted as a reminder of it. In 2025, the narrative deepened when unverified claims and speculative reports circulated suggesting Trump may have had knowledge of or involvement in certain interactions between Epstein and young women linked to Mar-a-Lago. While no credible evidence surfaced to substantiate these allegations, the mere existence of such stories added to the perception that the scandal was being leveraged for maximum political impact. The involvement of figures like Ghislaine Maxwell in potential information sharing with federal authorities, and the push from members to compel full release of Epstein-related records, heightened the stakes and reinforced the sense that the controversy had become entwined with Trump's presidency. The parallel between 2019 and 2025 is striking. In both cases, Epstein's name became a flashpoint during a Trump administration, with events timed in a way that seemed to exacerbate political vulnerability. During the first term, Trump leaned into the controversy, echoing suspicions and hinting at foul play. In the second, he dismissed the matter as a distraction, urging the public to move on, an abrupt shift in tone that only fueled further speculation about his motives. The repetition of this pattern across two separate presidencies has led many to conclude that the Epstein case has evolved from an isolated scandal into a recurring political hazard, one capable of destabilizing even the most carefully managed public narrative. The current scandal surrounding Jeffrey Epstein has also extended its reach beyond Donald Trump to also entangle Melania Trump, creating a dual front of political and personal pressure that complicates Trump's ability to manage the fallout. Allegations, ranging from plaintive claims of Melania's prior connection to Epstein before meeting Trump, to insinuations about her possible role in bringing young women into his orbit, have gained traction in certain media and political circles. While lacking substantiated evidence, these accusations have nevertheless amplified scrutiny on the former First Lady, limiting her ability to publicly defend her husband or serve as a stabilizing figure in his political image. Instead of appearing at key moments to project unity and resilience, Melania has maintained a reserved, distant posture, avoiding situations where the Epstein matter might be raised directly. Trump's political team has forcefully denied the claims, with public rebuttals and legal threats against outlets repeating the allegations. Yet the persistence of the story has undermined one of Trump's potential strategic advantages, the presence of a high-profile sympathetic who could deflect criticism and humanize his image during a scandal. By pulling Melania into the controversy, whether intentionally or through media amplification, critics have succeeded in creating a narrative where both members of the Trump household are under suspicion. This dynamic has intensified the perception of vulnerability, especially given Melania's already lower public profile during Trump's second term, when she shifted focus to charitable initiatives and away from politically charged appearances. Melania sidelined and unable to perform the traditional role of political spouse during crisis, Trump faces not only direct attacks on his own credibility, but also the loss of a valuable surrogate voice in the public arena. The implication that both he and Melania are connected to a figure as toxic as Epstein reinforces a perception problem that legal denials alone cannot easily erase. The broader political implications are equally significant. The controversy has sparked warnings from within the Republican Party that mishandling the Epstein issue could alienate key voter blocs ahead of the 2026 midterms. By intertwining Melania's name with the scandal, opponents have amplified its reach, ensuring that it resonates not just as a matter of Trump's past associations, but as a family-level issue that hints at deeper, more uncomfortable questions. For Trump, this means confronting a scandal that, even if legally baseless, has the potential to shape public perception and voter trust in ways that may prove more politically costly than the facts themselves. The belief that the missing minute was harmless originated from an official explanation claiming it was merely a common technical glitch in the DVAR system, a recurring occurrence with no implication of deliberate interference. This reasoning became even more convincing to those who received it when the missing footage happened, precisely between 11:59 p.m., a perfectly round time that easily evokes the idea of an automatic data synchronization process. For individuals like Pam Bondi, the fact that this information came from what was perceived as an authoritative source reinforced their confidence, leading them to regard it as nothing more than a routine technical issue, unworthy of suspicion. However, when cross-referenced with other sources, a very different picture emerges. The 128-page report by the Department of Justice's Office of the Inspector General's WUG makes no mention of missing minute as part of any recurring technical problem. Multiple inmates in the same housing unit stated that around 1200 to 100 OM, someone came by to check cells timing that aligns directly with the missing footage. And security experts note that DV-VAR systems in high security housing units are designed to avoid data loss, unless there is a serious malfunction or intentional tampering. In comparable cases within other secure facilities, any technical cause for data loss is typically documented to remove doubt. Yet here, no such official explanation exists. All these factors mean that, while the harmless theory initially seemed reasonable, it now appears far less tenable when weighed against the available evidence and standard investigative practice. That said, there are reasons the common technical glitch story felt plausible at first blush. Older DV-VAR systems sometimes hiccup, especially at midnight rollovers. When timestamp counters reset, clocks resync to a time server, or a file is closed and a new one is opened. A gap that lands precisely at 11:59 naturally primes observers to think automated sync, not interference. And, when such an explanation is delivered by a putative authorities, a warden, an investigator, a government spokesperson, most people will accept it absent clear contradictory evidence. Authority bias and the normalcy heuristic both nudge audiences toward the least alarming conclusion. In other words, if you assume legacy hardware, a timestamp boundary, and a confident official telling you it's routine, the harmless hypothesis isn't irrational. It's the path of least resistance. Yet this is precisely where the benign glitch narrative begins to fray. A 128-page investigative report from the Department of Justice's Office of the Inspector General, intended to catalog every relevant anomaly surrounding Epstein's detention, contains no reference whatsoever to a daily, 1-minute drop in the recording stream. In secure facility investigations, even minor, non-suspicious technical irregularities are normally logged to preempt speculation. Here, the silence is conspicuous. Compounding that gap, there is no accompanying body of maintenance records, engineering notes, or manufacturer service bulletins that would corroborate the idea that this model of DV-VAR routinely sheds a minute at midnight. Without contemporaneous work orders, fault logs, or preventive maintenance schedules documenting such a quirk, the claim remains an unsubstantiated assertion. The absence of both official acknowledgement in the formal findings and any parallel technical paper trail sharply undermines the normal system behavior explanation and invites the conclusion that, if this were a known harmless defect, it would have been preserved in the record as a matter of standard investigative protocol. Adding further strain to the routine glitch account is the convergence between multiple inmate statements and the precise window of missing footage. Several prisoners housed on the same tier independently recalled that, sometime between midnight and 1 o'clock in the morning, a figure moved along the row to perform what appeared to be a check of the cells. This collective recollection directly contradicts the official timeline, which fixes the last approach to that area at 10:40 p.m. The discrepancy is not trivial. It suggests activity occurring during the very interval that the recording does not capture. That possibility is magnified by the physical layout. Surveillance coverage ends at the stairwell and does not extend to the door of Epstein's cell. Anyone moving with intent to avoid the lens could, during that blind minute, reach the cell front without ever being visible on the archived feed. The overlap of eyewitness accounts with this architectural vulnerability transforms what might be dismissed as a coincidental timestamp gap into a window of opportunity, one in which movement could occur entirely beyond the camera's documented field of view. The DoVR system upgrade has created a verification gap that cannot be bridged. Any demonstration performed on the current platform fails as a valid control because it runs on a different firmware version, looping recording algorithm, time synchronization mechanism (TP), file splicing process at the day boundary, and even frame indexing method. In digital forensics, reproducibility requires a control sample that is absolutely identical to the original environment down to the build number, scheduler configuration, available disk space, fragmentation state, and background task schedule, all of which are typically overwritten during an upgrade. Such upgrades also tend to alter log structures and erase historical operational traces, eliminating the minimum prerequisites for proving a recurring glitch. As incident logs from the same period, maintenance records, bit-level disk images from the pre-upgrade recorder, or a sample device of the same hardware-software generation. As a result, any attempt to showcase a missing minute using post-upgrade data is essentially comparing apples to oranges, failing the forensic replication standard and carrying little weight under technical evidence criteria. In other words, once the platform has changed, the recurring glitch theory shifts from a verifiable proposition to an unfalsifiable claim, severely diminishing its inferential value in light of the already established timing discrepancies and camera blind spot issues. Given this erosion of the recurring glitch argument's evidentiary strength, the likelihood that Pam Bondi or others who echoed the same was consciously fabricating a cover story appears minimal. Her delivery style, tonal cadence, and nonverbal cues during public commentary all align with patterns typically associated with genuine belief rather than rehearsed deception. Eye focus remained steady, facial musculature moved fluidly in synchrony with speech, and there were no notable latency shifts in response timing that would suggest the cognitive load of inventing facts on the fly. The absence of micro-expressions indicating suppression or discomfort, coupled with the confident integration of the claim into her broader narrative, points toward a speaker convinced of the information's validity. In this context, her stance is more plausibly the product of reliance on what she perceived as credible institutional assurances, rather than an orchestrated attempt to mislead, placing her in the category of a good faith messenger whose conviction rests on unverified, and now technically uncorroborated assertions. It is far more plausible that her statements were a direct relay of briefing points provided by an official channel, passed along without undergoing any independent validation. In high-profile cases, spokespersons and affiliated figures often operate within an information chain, where institutional narratives are treated as definitive, particularly when they come from agencies presumed to have conducted exhaustive technical reviews. Under such conditions, there is a natural tendency to treat those inputs as conclusive facts, rather than provisional claims requiring further scrutiny. Without direct access to the raw surveillance data, maintenance archives, or the investigative team's internal communications, her capacity to perform a substantive verification would have been inherently limited. This dynamic creates a dependency on the authority of the source, allowing an unexamined explanation, however incomplete or flawed, to be repeated with full confidence, effectively transforming her into a conduit for an official position rather than an originator of independent analysis. Continuing the reasoning around her role as a good faith messenger, the likelihood that she was operating under information steering is high due to systematic filtering mechanisms within official communication chains. Content is condensed into talking points, executive summaries, and QA scripts, in which sensitive details are omitted and language is standardized to reduce uncertainty and cool suspicion. At the technical level, leadership briefings are often detached from raw data, replaced by generalized descriptions and safe phrasing. Routine malfunction. No signs of interference that frame perception from the outset. Anchoring effects and confirmation bias. then cause the recipient to the initial narrative and rarely re-examine it. At the legal media interface, the need-to-know principle, investigative confidentiality, attorney-client privilege, and reputation risk management allow only the release of harmless portions of information, while exceptions, contradictions, technical reports, or procedural deviations are compressed into broad, non-specific answers. Meanwhile, gatekeepers, legal counsel, press officers, agency coordinators control briefing schedules, vet language, and route away difficult questions, making access to source documents, device logs, or internal communications virtually impossible for someone speaking outside the investigative team. The result is that the spokesperson receives a stream of pre-framed, selectively curated information enough to reassure the public, but lacking depth for independent verification. When those key points are repeated with confidence, the speaker is not lying, but rather faithfully reflecting the official version that has been optimized to reduce doubt and limit further inquiry. Continuing the reasoning on information framing mechanisms, the harmless belief is also easily formed due to a pronounced knowledge asymmetry. A speaker outside the investigative team rarely gains access to the full WIG report, a complete version with technical appendices, interview transcripts, and system configuration diagrams, and is almost never able to examine the original datas, second-by-second DV.VMs logs, NTP time sync records and drift values, event syslogs, SNMP traps, SHA-256 hash manifests for exported video, export merge metadata, camera configuration snapshots, or hardware maintenance schedules. Procedural barriers, investigative confidentiality, need-to-know restrictions, protective orders, FOIA delays or redactions, and national security justifications mean that the public-facing release is typically an executive summary with excerpts, lacking the key annexes where technical anomalies would be scrutinized. In the absence of primary sources, the recipient must rely on secondary narration and official authority, subject to the illusion of explanatory depth, feeling. One understands a mechanism without seeing the data of narrative inertia and echo effects from repeated citations. At the same time, the complexity of digital forensics, loop recording algorithms, day boundary file cuts, frame indexing, time synchronization leaves most souls without the tools to critically assess such claims, making them more inclined to accept a safe-sounding explanation. The result is that, in conditions where technical appendices are missing and raw data is inaccessible for independent review, the routine glitch hypothesis is automatically favored as a seemingly reasonable assumption, even though its evidentiary value erodes sharply when set against the already documented timing discrepancies and surveillance blind spots. Bringing the entire line of reasoning together, there is no quantitative or qualitative indication that Pam Bondi deliberately fabricated false information or intentionally concealed facts. Every observable aspect of her delivery presentation style, consistency in argumentation, and nonverbal responses aligns with the demeanor of someone who believes in the accuracy of what they are conveying. That said, it is highly likely that both she and others sharing her position formed their views based on a set of data points and technical explanations supplied through official channels, none of which appear to have undergone third-party independent verification. This information framework, received in an environment lacking access to the full investigative record and original data, naturally encourages recipients to treat it as inherently reliable. When measured against newly surfaced findings such as discrepancies in reported cell check times, blind spots in camera coverage, and the absence of any technical documentation confirming the missing minute as a recurring system fault, the foundation of that initial belief shows clear limitations. However, this reasoning only holds if we assume that Bondi had no control over, nor the ability to influence, the information sources available to her, if, in reality, she possessed deeper access, such as the ability to review original data, determine what was disclosed, or decide what was omitted. Then the possibility of orchestration or narrative management cannot be entirely dismissed. In that scenario, her expression of confidence in the technical glitch explanation might not stem solely from being fed a one-sided account, but rather from a strategic choice to reinforce a message that served specific interests. Was Pam Bondi truly a well-intentioned messenger relying on information she did not control? Or was she actively shaping the narrative while knowing more than she revealed? Clear indications of Pam Bondi's efforts to shield information emerge through a series of specific actions that reflect a strategy aimed at both controlling the flow of data and managing the intensity of public reaction. The delay in releasing the full Epstein files, including investigative records and physical evidence, significantly extended the public's wait for access, creating a window of time large enough to allow for review and handling of sensitive content. Previously, Bondi had asserted the existence of a client list tied to Epstein's network, yet later she completely denied it, prompting public skepticism about the consistency and true purpose of her earlier statement. In parallel, she actively diverted media and public attention toward politically safer topics, such as announcing the creation of a special task force to investigate allegations connected to the 2016 election, a subject appealing to segments of Trump's base, but unrelated to the Epstein matter. Internal sources have alleged that Bondi instructed the FBI to conduct an exhaustive review of each file in order to identify and remove details that could be damaging to Trump before allowing their release. Notably, in a closed-door briefing, she is said to have informed Trump that his name appeared multiple times in the files, yet she refused to elaborate publicly, citing the need to protect victims' identities and avoid disclosing classified sensitive elements. Taken together, these actions, viewed within the political and media context, suggest a systematic effort to shape both the scope and content of the narrative before it reached the public, while preserving the position of key figures involved. In contrast to her efforts to control and narrow the flow of information, Pam Bondi found herself at odds with the media frenzy intensifying around Jeffrey Epstein's death. While she deliberately downplayed shock elements and sought to cool public reaction by dismissing details likely to ignite controversy, influential MAGA figures such as Dan Bongino and numerous influencers on the social network platform continuously amplified suspicion, calling for the full release of all related documents and evidence. The debate reached a new flashpoint when surveillance footage released by the Department of Justice, intended to reinforce the suicide narrative, was revealed to contain an unexplained 60-second gap, providing fresh fuel for conspiracy theories. Against this backdrop, Donald Trump publicly urged the disclosure of grand jury transcripts, yet cited strict legal barriers, creating the impression of a calculated delay. This dynamic fueled speculation that Bondi and Trump may be jointly employing a two-track strategy. On one side, reassuring and maintaining the loyalty of the MAGA base with promises of transparency, while on the other, quietly prolonging the release process to safeguard strategic interests. A full unsealing of all circumstances surrounding Jeffrey Epstein's death carries significant risks for Donald Trump, rooted in the content of the related records. Among them are documents noting his past social connections with Epstein, despite Trump's repeated public denials of any close relationship. The greater danger lies in the potential emergence of previously unreleased details, such as a list of names or video footage, that could inflict serious damage to his personal image, particularly given his history of facing sexual misconduct allegations. Comprehensive disclosure would not only reignite old suspicions, but could also fuel a wave of new conspiracy theories, undermining the loyalty of the MAGA base, which has been central to his political strength. Moreover, political opponents, especially Democrats, would be poised to exploit any unfavorable detail to intensify attacks, turning the case into a pressure tool against Trump's credibility and standing both within his own ranks and in the broader public sphere. Alongside the external risks, internal fractures are widening in ways that may prove difficult to repair. Core MAGA voters and a block of Republican lawmakers have openly voiced frustration over Pam Bondi's failure to deliver on her transparency pledge. seeing it as a sign of holding back rather than clarifying the truth. The hardline faction, led by Thomas Massie and Anna Paulina Luna, has escalated pressure by demanding the full release of all records and pushing to subpoena Ghislaine Maxwell, shifting the matter from a media dispute into a procedural confrontation with the potential for subpoenas and public testimony. In the online sphere, MAGA influencers and Elon Musk have directly questioned why Trump has not ordered immediate declassification, disrupting message discipline within the conservative camp and creating the impression of a leadership under strain. At the same time, accusations have surfaced that Bondi steered her coordination with the FBI toward shielding Trump, rather than pursuing independent verification, deepening perceptions of a conflict of interest and eroding trust in the review process. Against this backdrop, multiple signals suggest Trump is wary of the political cost of continuously defending Bondi, the sacrifice option pushing her to the forefront to take responsibility as a way to relieve pressure is rumored to be a contingency to preserve control of the agenda. If such a scenario were to unfold, the support coalition risks splintering further between those demanding total transparency and those loyalists prioritizing strategic preservation, potentially triggering new leaks, cross-party attacks, and a breakdown in Trump's own media strategy. Adding to the already fractured internal landscape, multiple external forces are simultaneously increasing political friction with the aim of putting Trump at a disadvantage. The political opposition and left-leaning media have actively framed the narrative to emphasize Trump's past acquaintance with Epstein, sustaining a cycle of negative coverage through investigative pieces, commentary, and calls for declassification designed to keep public attention fixed on the issue. In parallel, suspicions of deep state involvement circulating in some quarters allege interference in the archiving and selection of records to exert pressure on the release timeline and the integrity of disclosures, though no independently verified evidence has surfaced. Horizontally, a faction of hardline conservatives within the GOP is leveraging the crisis to bargain for influence, demanding greater oversight powers, pushing for formal hearings, or forcing deeper declassification as a way to expand their leverage in intra-party power struggles. At the same time, victims and advocacy groups focused on justice and accountability have been pressing for access to the files, preservation of evidence, and legal action, prioritizing the rights of survivors, while their aims are not targeted at any single political figure. The indirect effect heightens media risk for Trump, as any new detail could amplify public suspicion. Collectively, these forces, media framing, institutional skepticism, internal power bargaining, and legal moral pressure from victims form a matrix that forces the White House and its allies to choose between full transparency, accepting short-term damage, or continued information controls. Risking accusations of a cover-up, narrowing Trump's room to maneuver. Pam Bondi and Donald Trump are caught in a multi-layered bind, facing both external pressure from political opponents, left-leaning media, advocacy groups, and lingering deep state suspicions, and internal demands for transparency from the MAGA base and segments of the Republican Party. Their strategy of controlling the flow of information and delaying the release of the Epstein files may mitigate immediate, direct risks in the short term, but it has also fueled public suspicion, created message inconsistencies, and opened space for adversaries to exploit. The central dilemma is that the longer the records remain sealed, the higher the political cost and public pressure become. Yet, if the files are fully released, the potential exposure of damaging details, whether direct or circumstantial, could seriously harm Trump's image, especially given his reliance on unwavering loyalty from the MAGA base. In essence, they are trapped between two high-risk options: embrace parency and face immediate fallout, or continue controlling information and risk sustained accusations of a cover-up. How they choose to navigate this moment will not only shape the public narrative around Epstein, but will also have a direct impact on Trump's political credibility and his grip on power moving forward. Pam Bondi and Donald Trump are navigating a multi-front battle with external attacks from political opponents, left-leaning media, advocacy groups, and persistent deep state whispers, alongside internal pressure from the MAGA base and factions of the Republican Party demanding full disclosure. Their tactic of delaying and filtering the Epstein files may shield them from short-term shocks, but it has deepened suspicion, fractured messaging, and handed ammunition to adversaries eager to control the narrative. The longer the Epstein records stay sealed, the more intense the politist and public skepticism will grow, yet if they are released in full, any newly surfaced link, whether direct, circumstantial, or open to interpretation, could inflict lasting damage, particularly given Trump's dependence on unwavering loyalty within his base. It's a trap between two perilous paths. Embrace transparency now and suffer immediate fallout, or maintain control and endure escalating accusations of a cover-up. And in a world where, as some allege, figures like Lex Wexner can purchase an Obama house for Epstein to live in after his so-called death, the game may already be rigged. From the top down, the powers that be place individuals where they are needed to secure predetermined outcomes. Equal justice, in the sense we once believed in, is gone. Absolute power dictates the reality we are allowed to see, while the real truth remains locked within the closed circles of those who control it. To the rest of us, the minions of today's constructed reality, truth is whatever they decide it will be. Building on this climate of secrecy and controlled narratives, one of the most provocative claims circulating in certain investigative and conspiracy-oriented circles is that billionaire retail magnate Lex Wexner, long alleged to have deep financial and personal ties to Jeffrey Epstein, purchased an upscale property, commonly referred to as an Obama house, for Epstein to occupy after his purported death. This assertion, if taken at face value, challenges the official account not merely by suggesting Epstein survived, but by implying he was afforded protection, resources, and a safe haven by a figure of immense wealth and influence. The symbolism of the Obama house label compounds the intrigue, evoking associations with political prestige, elite networks, and a lifestyle far removed from the punishment expected for a convicted offender. For those inclined to believe this version of events, such an arrangement would be further evidence that Epstein was an asset too valuable, whether for his connections, his intelligence value, or his potential leverage, to be left to the justice system. In that framework, Wexner's alleged role becomes not just a personal favor, but a calculated move within a larger apparatus of power, where select individuals are quietly repositioned to preserve the stability of those who control the levers of political, economic, and social influence. Flowing naturally from the allegation that Epstein may have been shielded by high-level benefactors, this perspective frames the entire landscape as one in which outcomes are predetermined by a tightly knit hierarchy of decision makers, the so-called powers that be. According to this worldview, these actors operate with seamless coordination, positioning individuals at every tier of society, from the most visible political offices to the least scrutinized bureaucratic posts, ensuring that institutional decisions align with their strategic interests. Within such a system, the concept of equal justice under the law becomes less a guiding principle and more a public illusion, an ideal nostalgically but absent in present-day governance. Advocates of this belief argue that the era when legal standards applied uniformly, regardless of wealth or influence, has not simply eroded but vanished entirely. What remains is a structure in which the allocation of power, the flow of information, and the rendering of verdicts are all choreographed in advance, leaving ordinary citizens to navigate a reality that has been engineered to maintain the dominance of those already in control. Extending this line of thought, the argument contends that in a world dominated by entrenched elites, absolute power functions as the ultimate gatekeeper of perception, deciding which fragments of information are permitted to surface and which are buried beyond public reach. Reality, in this schema, is not an objective construct, but a curated narrative, selectively assembled and disseminated to serve the strategic needs of those occupying the innermost circles of influence. Only these insiders, bound together by mutual interests, shared secrets, and overlapping networks, are privy to the infiltrate sequence of events, the genuine motives behind major decisions, and the authentic consequences that follow. For everyone else, the so-called minions of contemporary society, access to truth is mediated through layers of omission, distortion, and staged transparency. The outcomes we are shown are not organic developments, but end products of deliberate choice, predetermined long before they are unveiled, and carefully framed to ensure they reinforce the legitimacy of the existing power structure rather than threaten it. Carrying this perspective to its most pointed conclusion, the claim asserts that the individuals occupying these highest echelons of influence have effectively been elevated to a status akin to deities within the modern order. Their authority extends beyond governance or economics into the realm of defining perception itself, reshaping facts, rewriting contexts, and setting the parameters of what the broader population is allowed to accept as reality. In this construct, truth is not an independent constant, but a malleable commodity, sculpted and rebranded at will to align with the objectives of those in command. Such power allows them to dictate not only the narratives that dominate public discourse, but also the collective memory of events, ensuring that history itself bends to their preferred version. For those outside this circle, questioning these narratives becomes an act of defiance, while acceptance reinforces the very hierarchy that grants these figures their godlike capacity to decide what is and what is not. This view ultimately frames these figures as occupying a near-divine position in the hierarchy of control individuals, whose reach extends far beyond conventional power structures into the very fabric of perception itself. They determine not merely what information is accessible, but how it is framed, interpreted, and absorbed by the public. In this paradigm, reality ceases to be an objective state and instead becomes a carefully engineered construct, curated to serve specific agendas and protect entrenched interests. By controlling the narrative and the context in which events are understood, they can shape both present understanding and the historical record, ensuring that collective memory conforms to their chosen version of truth. For the wider population, this means living within a reality designed by unseen hands, where challenging the official storyline risks social or political reprisal, and acquiescence only deepens the dependence on the architects of that reality.